Hello and welcome to Curator with a Camera. I'm Anthony Coulls, Senior Curator at the National Railway Museum, and we're here at Locomotion to look at the speed demon of 1895, the winner of the races to the north, Hardwicke. Hardwicke survives to be in the National Collection solely because of its role in the races to the north. Francis William Webb, who was the chief engineer of the London North Western Railway, originally created the Precedent Class in the 1870s. But Hardwicke, as we see it now, is an improved precedent, built or rebuilt in 1892, and in 1895 it's a front runner on the West Coast Main Line to the north of England. Hardwicke was fast, wasn't particularly strong, but for the races to the north, not that there was official racing condoned at all by the railway companies, the LNWR started going all out. In 1895 there was renewed competition sparked by the East Coast and the West Coast trying to get to Aberdeen as quickly as possible. The competition was fierce. So on the East Coast you had the Great Northern Railway running up to the North Eastern Railway, running up to the North British Railway, and on the West Coast you had the London North Western Railway and the Caledonian Railway. They try to cut the times down and shave half an hour off. The engines are running faster, the crews are up for it. So Hardwicke was ideally placed for the hard run between Crewe and Carlisle. If you travel it to this day on your West Coast Pendolino, then you will see that it is a curving line. It's sinuous, it's tortuous, and it's steep as well. You've got particularly the famous climb to Shap Summit in Cumberland. So that is what the crew of Hardwicke faced on that evening in August 1895. And they rose to that challenge. The little engine behind me responded. The crew gave their all and let the engine have its head. With 71 tonnes behind the tender, it went. And the average speed for that engine for the 141 miles between Crewe and Carlisle was 67.1 miles an hour, with maximums reached of 90 miles an hour. In 1895, speeds unheard of. The passengers were thrown around, but they didn't care. They were part of something amazingly special. So Hardwicke set the record for the fastest non-stop steam service from Crewe to Carlisle. And to put it into context, the speed record, the average speed from Crewe to Carlisle, was not bettered until the mid-1930s when the Princess Royal class locomotive, Princess Elizabeth, beat that record with a much longer, much heavier train, but again, an epic performance from locomotive and crew. Let's have a look at the anatomy of the improved precedent then. It's a London and North Western Railway locomotive designed by Francis William Webb, and the thing that marks out LNWR locomotives when we stand back from it is how basic they are. We always talk about locomotives being a tool to do a job, and quite often there's a lot of decoration on them. You know, even a little tank engine for the London, Brighton and South Coast like Box Hill is ornate. The livery is very fancy, it's got brass, it's got copper. Hardwicke and the LNWR marked out by having none of that at all, because it's a waste of money, isn't it? Starting at the front, as we so often do with the film, we look at the chimney there. It's got a cast iron top to it. That's perhaps the closest we will get to ornamental decoration, unlike the very plain stovepipe of 910 next to it. But the smokebox there, really simple. Opened by a dart and a hand wheel at the front, and then down to the front of the engine, below the smokebox, the pair of cylinders, a twin cylinder engine, two-cylinder engine, the cylinders mounted side by side with the valves on top, and the front of the buffer beam, 3 lamp irons, vacuum brake hose, and the buffer beam itself, the buffer plank, is timber, it's wood. So, you know, really simple machine. This is not an engine designed with the comfort of the driver and fireman in mind. It's not even designed to be particularly practical. So the smoke box door opens out over this way. If you want to empty out the ash, check out the smoke box, the blast pipe, emptying the tubes, but there is hardly anywhere for the fireman or the shed staff to stand whilst they're trying to sort this engine out. Gives you a start of an impression of what it was like to operate this engine. Standing back from it, we can see that the wheel arrangement, we so often talk about the wheel arrangement, is a 2-4-0, 2 leading wheels at the front, not even a pony truck, so they're just carrying wheels, and then 4 coupled or driving wheels together. There's our guard iron there. British railways are traditionally and always have been fenced off so that livestock doesn't stray onto the line. That's why you don't see cow catchers on UK locos. The American railways and a lot of railways around the world, they run their railways across open land, so you have much more of a chance of hitting something, and therefore they were fitted with cow catchers. The UK, we just have guard irons which might just push something to one side, whether it's a piece of tree or a bit of debris or whatever. Moving on down the engine then, behind the chimney there, that's not an ornamental piece, that's a regulator lubricator, a displacement lubricator. As you will see on our Curator with a camera with Dolgoch on the Tailteann Railway, 1860s engine, this is an original 1870s design rebuilt in the 1890s. The technology hasn't moved on, but a lubricator there designed to use the displacement of condensing steam and water to put oil down into the cylinders. Between the frames, here's the 2 cylinders side by side, actuating a pair of valves on the top in between those 2 cylinders. The mechanics of it are very similar to so many Victorian steam engines. So there's the 2 slide bars and the crossheads underneath connecting the pistons to the connecting rods, and then between the 2 connecting rods here is the valve gear, the Allen straight link valve gear, so called because the expansion link here is straight, unlike Stevenson valve gear where it's curved. And there, towards the back of the engine, is the crank axle on this first leading set of driving wheels, so that is where the drive from the pistons is taken through. Other little bits and pieces to note on the engine is there on the bottom of the boiler is a belly door. That's there for inspection, so you can get in and maintain the boiler from underneath into the bottom of the barrel, usually when you've got the tubes out. Also enables you to get anything that's settled down at the bottom of the boiler out of the way. And then you can see oil boxes on either side. Very simple gravity feed oil boxes taking oil down to the axle boxes on that leading axle. And here, linkage coming through from the sandbox. Once again, as we've seen so many times on locos, the sandbox to allow sand to drop down onto the wheels, actuated by gravity from a handle within the cab through that linkage and down through to the sandpipe going to the front driving wheel there. Moving back to the outside of the engine, we see that still very little expense, in fact no expense is spared on the ornamentation of the loco. The livery is black, lined out on the boiler barrel in red, and then a little concession here with grey and cream as well. It really does look quite good. There's my reflection, and well, yeah, that shows you something of the quality of the paint finish there. The black itself is quite often known or referred to by enthusiasts as blackberry black, because there's like a bluish hue to it, or there can be. The LNWR referred to it as drop black, but in reality the paint was simply black. The sheen, the finish came from the depth of the varnish that was applied later. And on the splasher here, which is there to both hide the wheel from sight but also make sure you don't get mud and water splashed all over the engine, it's a splasher. Here is that glorious LNWR nameplate with the letters inset for the name Hardwicke. Hardwicke was Lord Hardwicke, who was an MP at the time, had a horse race named after him, we found during research for this programme, and there is the original date of the locomotive's construction. LNWR company, August, crew works 1873, referring to the original build date of Hardwicke rather than the rebuild date of 1892. And there, the glorious coat of arms of the London North Western Railway. Whilst the engine itself might not have been particularly fancy, that's probably one of the best coat of arms that you'll see on a Victorian locomotive. So moving back, as we head up towards the cab, a pair of Ramsbottom safety valves hiding under that shroud, that casing on top of the firebox. John Ramsbottom, another London and North Western Railway chief engineer, but really important because the Ramsbottom safety valves were tamper-proof. It made sure that drivers or firemen couldn't screw the safety valves down and get extra power out of the engine and send themselves to heaven in the process. So all LNWR engines fitted with Ramsbottom safety valves, but Ramsbottom safety valves became a standard across the railways of the 19th century. A pair of washout plugs on the side of the firebox there, and then between the pair of driving wheels you can see the bottom of the firebox and the ashpan extending underneath it, and then the two brake blocks acting on the driving wheels forward and reverse. And there on the front of the ashpan you can see the damper. And damper control, we quite often look at the damper on the footplate of a loco, and if I put the light on you can see it better. It's a flap which can be closed or opened to allow more air through the fire from the bottom through the fire. Moving along up to the side of the cab, there is LNWR 790, the running number of Hardwicke, and above it the most basic rudimentary cab you could ever wish for. There is very little protection for the driver and fireman here. And can you imagine battling through the night in 1895 with this little engine rocking and rolling, bouncing around 67, 70, 80, nearly 90 miles an hour, and very little crew protection at all. It's no wonder that a lot of drivers and firemen in the 19th century wore beards, because that would keep them warm, keep the wind out. But all you have for protection potentially on this engine, you can see these hooks along the back of the cab. There would be a tarpaulin or a sheet which could be extended from the back of the cab to these hooks on the top of the toolboxes on the tender. But the cab controls are very similar to so many of the engines that we've looked at. We have, as with the Great Western engines like Lodestar, City of Truro, King George V, there is one gauge glass for the water level. There's our regulator in the middle. There's our injector, steam controls, the hand wheels on either side of the firebox with a little wheel for trimming it. There's an up and down firebox door, actually quite similar to Dunluce Castle, London North Western Railway pattern. The flap goes in underneath into the firebox, and then here on the left the screw reverse wheel and the lubricator there behind, the hydrostatic lubricator, and further valves, the vacuum brake, very simple vacuum brake, very early vacuum brake on the LNWR engines, but it's very effective. Then our steam heat pressure gauge, and then over on the far side vacuum gauge and the boiler pressure gauge. And then round to the tender itself, which is in essence on this machine a coal cart with a water tank. The tender floor is flat. The fireman, he's got to start walking to the back of the tender to bring coal forward. Amazing. But you know, how does this little engine manage that epic run on the races to the north? How does it take on water on the move? Because we talk about engines taking water from water cranes and water towers. But if you're going to run consistently between Crewe and Carlisle without stopping, you need to take water. And this is where the London North Western Railway and the North Eastern Railway, they all built what were called water troughs. What the water troughs did, they enabled you to take water from a trough between the rails at speed with the locomotive on the move. So this wheel operated down through the mechanism to the back of the engine and dropped a scoop into the trough. At 60 miles an hour, the force of the water entering that scoop then pushed the water up into the tender of the loco. You then got an indication that water would start to spill out. Some of the engines, there's a gauge here on the side of the tender which has a tube in it, and you would see, or you should see, the level of the water rise as the engine took on water. As it then began to reach the top of the tube, the fireman would then raise the scoop. If he didn't raise the scoop fast enough, then the tender would overflow and water would spew out of the top of the tender tank filler at the back, and the people riding in the first coach, if they had the windows open, would have a little bit of an on-the-move shower. So Hardwicke is here. The boiler itself is actually a lot newer than the rest of the locomotive. Hardwicke was one of the improved precedents that made it into London, Midland and Scottish Railway ownership in 1923. And in 1926 it was fitted with a new boiler made by Ruston and Hornsby of Lincoln, who were better known for making stationary engines, traction engines, road rollers, excavators and diesel locomotives already by then. But the railway works didn't have the capacity to make new boilers at the time, certainly in the speed that they were required. So the LMS turned to private industry, and Ruston and Hornsby made the boiler for this loco, which ironically is why it was in such good condition and was able to be steamed in 1975 for the Shildon anniversary cavalcade. Now, having had the new boiler in 1926, you'd think that would give the engine a long life. But by the early 1930s, the LMS was under a new chief mechanical engineer, Sir William A. Stanier, who made the move to standardise his locomotive fleet. Rather than having thousands of different locos from the Midland Railway, from London Tilbury and Southend, from London North Western Railway and Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, all the constituents, he wanted a standard type of locomotive, or standard types of locomotive for different purposes, which is where you see the Black 5 and the Duchess come in, for example. So the writing was on the wall for Hardwicke. It was a power class 1P, which meant that it didn't really have an awful lot of grunt. Whilst it was brilliant in 1892, the power class 1P, well, you could do local trains with it, you could potter around with it, you could do branch lines. For example, just to compare that, the Duchess of Hamilton is an 8P. It's very powerful, so you go from 0 to 8. So it's not quite unable to pull the skin off a rice pudding, but it wouldn't manage the jam as well. So Hardwicke came out of service in 1932 and was put aside for preservation, purely on the merits of what it had done in August 1895. An amazing survivor, a wonderful piece of our collection, a really basic engine that gives you an insight into what it was like for the managers of the railway, for the crews of the loco. Like we keep saying, look at the lining on that, the paint finish, the copper, the brass. It's beautiful, but it doesn't make the thing go any better. The LNWR eschewed all of that. They put the fripperies to one side. They made a basic machine that worked hard and worked well, and that earned this machine its place in the history books and its place in our collection. Thank you for joining us today for Curator with a Camera, looking at the epic star of the West Coast performances of the races to the north. Not that they were races, of course, officially. If you want to know more about the East Coast rivals, then do watch my colleague Chris's video coming very soon. Always, if you've enjoyed this video, Why not like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future films?